All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. My name is Jim Crispino. I'm the Director of Developer Evangelism here at Genesys. And I am joined here not by John Carnell, who you see on the slide. John had a family emergency and could not join me today. So I am joined by my colleague Prashant Patel, who works on my team as another developer evangelist. And today we're going to talk about event-based integrations with Genesys Cloud. Before we get started, as typical, just a few logistics. We'll try to keep a 10-minute Q&A at the end of this tutorial. And so if you have any questions while we're going along, use the Q&A link on Zoom. There's a Q&A button down along the bottom of your screen. Use that panel to post your questions in, and we'll try to answer them like as we go. If not, we'll gather them up and answer them at the end of the tutorial. And we are recording this. It will be placed on our community YouTube channel for Genesys, and it's also available on the Developer Center at developer.genesys.cloud/video.
Welcome to Genesys.
Oh, hey, Prashant, can you go on mute? Thank you. All right. Before we get, I'm not going to kill you guys with slides. I've got one additional slide here, and then we'll kind of get into the presentation. So today we're going to talk about the various event mechanisms in Genesys, why you would use one over the other, and how to use one over the other. So we're going to start off today with I'll say our oldest event mechanism, which is our notification API. That is a WebSocket-based system for getting real-time events out of the platform. And it's really designed best to be used for user interface applications. It can be used for server-to-server integrations, and I'll talk about why you may not want to use it for that, but it really is designed around UI applications such as interaction widget panels that you might use in Genesys Cloud. While you're handling a conversation, you might have an iframed interaction widget that is monitoring what the agent's doing, monitoring the conversation, and giving the agent feedback, giving the agent things to talk about, providing canned responses, that kind of thing. Those kind of UI applications, those are great for the notification API. The typical setup for using this WebSocket-based notification API is to, just like everything with Genesys, authorize, or use OAuth, get an access token. You create what we call a channel, and I'll talk about what that is here in a bit. With that channel, you attach a WebSocket to it. You subscribe to topics. We have a number of topics, which I'll be showing you today. And then you sit back, and events will be delivered to you, and you handle those events. So the next newer event mechanism that we have is the AWS EventBridge. So EventBridge is an AWS service. So if you are an AWS shop, or even if you're not, you could get an AWS account and use this. But AWS EventBridge is a message bus kind of system, if you want to think about it, where events can be delivered into the bus, and you can have services that hang off of that bus and handle the events. So again, it's real-time events, just like with the notification API. So Genesys will deliver the events that you configure to the Amazon EventBridge bus, and you can have Lambdas and other things hanging off of that bus to process those. AWS EventBridge is very high performant and headless. There's no user context on that. So it's really best for server to server type applications. So if you wanted to, I don't know, build a workforce engagement, a WFM connector, or you wanted to get analytics out of the system, or some kind of server to server thing where you need to pull data in real time out of Genesys and process it, maybe to pass to another system. AWS EventBridge is really great for that. And one of the big benefits of EventBridge over the notification API is guaranteed message delivery. So there is a store and forward concept on EventBridge. If you disconnect from the EventBridge for some reason, let's say you have an external process that's using AWS APIs to consume those events. If that process were to go down for a certain period of time, if you come back and connect in within a threshold of time, you will be able to get those messages that you missed and process them in order. They're stored and kept in order for you to process. So we'll talk about how that's a little different than the notification API in a bit. The typical setup for EventBridge is really simple. It's super simple. We have an integration in Genesys Cloud. So if you were to go to admin and go to the integrations panel, you install our EventBridge integration. And there's some configuration to set up on that. You tell it, what AWS account to send these to and what events you want sent. You can pick from a list of events. And then there's nothing else. Genesys will automatically deliver events once that integration is activated. Events will be sent to EventBridge, and whatever you've got hooked up to that message bus can start handling those events. So we'll get into some details about EventBridge. Prashant's going to be the one kind of covering that, as he's got a good example set up for us. Oh, went backward. Okay, forward. The last one I want to talk about handles real-time events. It is built for a little bit different purpose. We call it process automation. It is a new API. It is in production. It just went in production a few weeks ago, I believe. It is meant to handle events internal to Genesys. There's no external thing that's listening to the events. You set up to say, if this event happens in Genesys, then perform this action. And it's really best for processing tasks, automated task, robotic process automation is the current buzzword, but processing events that happen, some would call it like a webhook idea concept, where you set up an event, you can call it webhook if you want to think of it in that terminology. I know some of Genesys's competitors have systems like this. So you basically say, if this event happens, I want to perform this action, and it'll just take care of it. So the way that is set up within Genesys is, first you create a workflow. So in Architect, you're probably used to call flows and message flows and email flows. We have a general purpose workflow in Architect that can be invoked from various places. And event triggers are one of those. So you create a workflow to, I don't know, maybe call a data action on a remote system when some event occurs, because you want to notify that system that that event happened. And then you set up the event trigger that watches events that happen, matches those events, invokes that workflow, and then that workflow will call that third-party system and perform some action. So those are our three event mechanisms. As I said, they are built for certain types of integrations, and we'll get into how you can use some for other purposes. So that's all I have for my slides. So if you give me just a moment, I'm going to stop. I am going to stop that presentation, and I'm going to go into demo mode here for you now. So let me share a different screen. All right, Prashant, confirm you can see my screen.
I can see it.
All right. All right, so I'm gonna look this way. I apologize for looking sideways on you all, but that's where my screen is. So the first thing I want to show you is the notification API. So as we said, that's built for user to user, or not user, but built for user interface type of integrations. You can use it for server to server type integrations. There's some complexity involved with that. So before I demo, let me just talk about that real quick. As it's WebSocket based, WebSockets can be transient. Any number of factors can go into a WebSocket going down. One of the primary ones is Genesys is built on top of AWS. We use auto scaling, and our WebSocket nodes are on an autoscaler. If AWS decides that there's not enough resources on one of our WebSocket nodes and it needs to consolidate resources, it might drop one of those nodes. And when it does, that WebSocket goes away. You would need to reconnect, resubscribe, and pick up where you left off. The downside of that is the notification API does not have that store and forward mechanism. So if you're gone, if that WebSocket drops for whatever reason, whether it's Genesys that drops it or maybe some internet hiccup happened that caused the WebSocket to drop, you are going to miss events. There are workarounds. If you wanted to use the notification API on a server-to-server, I would recommend look at building some kind of HA primary backup mechanism where you have a primary WebSocket and a backup WebSocket running simultaneously, subscribe to the same things, but you're only processing events off the primary. And should it ever go down, you can switch over to the backup immediately, not miss an event, reestablish the primary, and kind of run in that manner. It's a little more implementation on your part, but if you're really, if you're not an AWS shop and you need to use notification API and you need to do it for a server to server, that's kind of what you're in for. You need to plan for the transient nature of a WebSocket, being able to reestablish that and pick up where you left off. All right, with that said, let me show you how the notification API works. So I'm logged in here to Genesys Cloud, and I've also got a second panel, a second tab up here with the notification or with the Genesys Cloud Developer Center at developer.genesys.cloud. And first, let me show you where the documentation is. So the notification API, if you go in and go under notifications and alerts, go to notifications, our overview will talk about the notification service, how you authorize an application, use the API to create a channel, set up the WebSocket, how to subscribe, how to receive events, what those events will look like. So you can read that on your own time. That's an exercise left to the viewers. We have a number of topics that are available. And one thing to point out here, the three integration types I talked about, WebSocket, EventBridge, and process automation, you can choose to see just the events that are available on each of those. So some are not available on some channels. Almost everything's available on the WebSocket. Most of them are available on EventBridge, and then process automation has a relatively narrow view of events right now. So you can look at an event. I'm gonna show you two. I want to show you two of them right now. I'm going to scroll down to V2 users. The ones I'm going to show you are, I want to monitor the events for a user, for me, for my user. I want to modify or monitor my presence events. That's my status. If I go available or I'm busy or I'm out of the office, whatever. I want to monitor those events. I also want to monitor my routing status. So if I'm on queue, I want to know if I'm idle, if I'm in a conversation, et cetera. And I want to monitor my conversations themselves. So I'm down in the V2 users, and I'm going to scroll down a little more. V2 users presence. We'll start with presence. So if I click on that, I'm actually logged in. So I set up my account. I'm logged in. And so I can actually use the tooling within the Developer Center to subscribe to events. And I can see what the event schema for a presence event looks like. So if I were to receive an event on this, this is what the payload for that event's going to look like. So I get an example. If I'm writing code, I can know what those properties are to expect, and I can code to look at those properties. So let's go ahead. We'll use the tooling here in the Developer Center to consume those events. Since I'm doing something on my user, I need my user ID. I'm going to grab that, and I'm going to paste that into here. I'm already authenticated because I created this account. I already did the authorization part of that. I need to create a channel. So I'm going to add a new channel. Okay, so I've got my channel here. I'm going to use a tool that's going to create that WebSocket in a moment, and I want to subscribe to this event. So I'm going to subscribe. And it's kind of anticlimactic. I get a little thing that a subscription happened. I'm going to do that same thing on 2 more events. So I'm going to scroll down to routing status. And I'm going to put my user ID in there. And subscribe. And I'm going to go up to conversations. I want to know all the conversations that Jim handles. I'm going to put my user ID in there. And I'm going to subscribe. All right, so I've got 3 subscriptions on my channel, on my WebSocket. And if I go to the little tool icon here, I can pop up, there's a notifications tool there. And it says, all right, you have subscribed to these 3. See, it used my user ID. So I've got, it's hard to see. Let me make this not such a eye chart as well. There we go. So we got V2 users, my ID.presence, routing status, and conversations. And I can subscribe to other events from here. If I do that, I have to paste in the ID manually, but I don't have to use the API documentation or the topic events to do that. I can just pick an event here. I can paste in the ID and subscribe from right here. But I said I want to monitor those 3 events. So let me go change my status here. Let me make this a little smaller. And I will go from available, I'll go to away. And right away, it's real time, right? So you've got a program that's sitting here using the notification API, and it got the away status. And you can actually look at the payload that was received. We parse it and put it into a nice UI here, but you can see the raw events. And as I switch between statuses, I get those. There's meeting, there's meal, back to away, I'm available. So all of those are, I need to make this a little bigger so you can see that. All of these are the .presence events. I haven't generated any other kind of event. So to generate the routing status events, I need to go on queue. I'll go on queue. And I got an on queue presence event, and I got an idle routing status. So in terms of Genesys routing interactions to me, I am idle. So let me collapse that for a moment, and I'm going to send in a chat. So I'm going to use our web chat tools here. I'm going to use the older web chat because I know I've got that set up for this demo. So DevCast chat to customer support, and I'm going to populate the fields for a chat, and I'm going to start that chat. And what am I missing? Oh, it's down here. It's down here. Sorry. All right. So I've got the chat here. I'm going to start that. All right. So that comes over here. I've got my chat. And if I go to the tooling now, I had my routing status. Here's the conversation events for that user. So I got this event for the conversations, and you get multiple events. Everything that happens on a conversation will come through. Every change you put it on hold, you're going to get an event, so telling you it's on hold. As you release it, as you set the wrap-up code, all of that comes through. And I got a routing status of interacting. Once I accepted that interaction, I got a routing status of interacting. And if I release that and mark it done, I continue to get events, and then I go back to idle. So you can see how this works. Again, we've got great documentation on all of this up in the notification API. You've got your available topics. We have some example code that'll show you how to, in JavaScript, how to set up the channel and how to subscribe to topics and set up the WebSocket and have have a handler. So you can kind of get an idea of how to set up a general purpose code to handle events, and then you just choose the events that you're going to subscribe to and handle those. So let me check and see if we had any questions about the notification API. So we've got one here. Could we build API notifications to email distribution lists for outbound dialer completion codes? Like anytime we receive ambiguous completion codes. You can, yes. You should be able, there's probably a topic on outbound, B2 outbound. Well, you know what, Steve, you might post that into the forum, the Developer Center forum. I would have to do some research. I haven't built that myself, but I'm certain that you can find the outcome of the completion codes in real time and then do something with those to handle those. So if I look at it too long here, which I'm dying to do that, I'm dying to figure that out for you, Steve, but I've got two other topics we want to cover off here, and I don't want to run out of time. So we've got the notification APIs themselves are here. So how to set up a channel, you know, how to create a new channel is here. There's really no permissions needed. If you're doing a user interface, you do need a notification scope on your OAuth client for implicit grant or authorization code grant. But for you know, if you're doing some kind of server to server thing, there's no role permissions needed for that. And so I'd encourage you to just look over the notifications and topic in the Developer Center for further details. It's a real notification API is a really popular API. If you're doing anything that needs real-time events, and you're doing, especially for user interface applications, it's really great. One last thing. Let me go back to the chat. I want to show you where I'm using that. Let me start another chat. Oh, I did the messaging. Let me do a chat. Sorry for all the scrolling. That's just how this tooling is. So I'll start this chat. Let me get this back in here. Oh, I got to go on queue. Oh, I'm on queue. Uh-oh. Prashant, did that go to you? Are you on queue by chance?
It did, but.
Can you decline?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Thank you. So I'm going to answer this. So I said that you could use the notification API and widgets. So this is an interaction widget that I built. Sorry, it changed quickly. It was a UI that pops up. It does a implicit grant authentication as the logged in user. It uses the conversation topic to watch the conversation that I'm working on, and was showing conversation events. But sorry, my demo for that didn't work great. It redirects to Wikipedia on another for another reason. But interaction widgets, custom interaction widgets, are a great use of using those notification APIs. So with that, I am going to relinquish control. Prashant, are you ready to show EventBridge?
Oh, sure.
All right. So let me stop sharing. It's all yours.
Let me see. Unable to. Okay. Share. Okay, there we go. Jim, can you see my screen?
I can.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, and I can see your screen.
Okay, great. So as Jim described earlier, what AWS EventBridge offers and what we offer is integration of processes that can then notify AWS of things that are happening. So what I have set up is a simple event bridge that receives phone calls and notifications on phone calls. And what it looks like essentially is you'll get the, you'll get the message and AWS will pick it up and then post it either, depending on the rules you set up within AWS, you can post it to things like Lambdas, SQS, and other things. So what I've done here is with Genesys Cloud, what you have to do is go under here and add the integration for AWS EventBridge. And what this does, it gives permission to Genesys Cloud to look at an AWS account and interact with the EventBridge. And it's pretty simple. You use your AWS account ID along with the region, your name, and then credentials, I believe I had to post in when creating the integration. So when this is set up, this will allow you then to connect to AWS. And essentially, the largest component of AWS EventBridge is the event bus. And so I was able to create event bus by first going underneath sources, which source is the opposite direction connection with Genesys Cloud. So if you go underneath sources in EventBridge, you'll be able to set up a source here. And this needs to be set up in order for there to be communication between EventBridge, AWS, and Genesys Cloud. So I've already set that up. It will automatically get detected. You know, you're going to need the ARN at some point. Once that's set up, you'll be able to make phone call. Now, let me go back to the bus. Now, after the bus setup, I have a simple setup here. I've created, what happens is the messages comes in and I've created a rule. And the rule simply sends, well, I thought I did.
Pick the bus, up on the bus. I think I had to do this. I had to pick your bus, yeah. There you go.
So I was able to create a rule, which will send everything to CloudWatch. And so I've already got that open over here. And so with all that set up, I think I'm ready to show a log being created. So I'm just going to go ahead and make a simple phone call. You don't have to be on queue for this. So I've put a phone number in here.
Welcome to Genesys. Put your customers first with the world's #1 customer experience platform.
Oh,
Speak with us.
such a nice greeting, but I'm gonna have to hang up on her. So if we go then back to CloudWatch, I'm gonna go ahead and refresh this. I have on the, let me see, setup, the integration setup. You are required to add topics to be monitored. As Jim mentioned earlier, with notifications, you can select a number of topics for this. So this is great. You can just simply click on EventBridge topics, and it will filter all these events that you can get notified on with AWS. So going back, what I've selected in there was transcription, customer start, outbound, and user start. Now, I created the EventBridge because one of our partners needed to be notified when a phone call was outgoing. And so for that, we found the best topic to use was user start or outbound.
Hey,
or
Prashant,
customer start, rather.
Prashant, before you navigate away from that screen,
Sure.
can I point something out?
Absolutely.
So with the notification API, the events a lot of our events have a parameter needed. So for like the user events, you need to know the user ID of the user you're subscribing to. So the things in the curly braces, you can't, Prashant's screen's a little hard to see, but he's got v2.conversations.id.transcription. Okay, so if you're using the notification API, we don't allow wildcards in the event subscriptions. You have to specifically say, I want to listen to events for this user. You can't just say all users. If you want to listen to all users, you have to literally subscribe for each individual user to listen to them. With EventBridge, you don't need to do that. You go in and say, I want to subscribe to this topic, and the variable, the ID variable, it acts like a wildcard. And it says, oh, okay, I want to listen to all transcription events, or I want to listen to all conversation start events. So I'm sorry. Okay, so just wanted to point that out. So
No,
go ahead.
that's great, because what you can do in EventBridge is actually, and I forgot to mention this, but I think you can filter
Yeah.
the events on a particular topic. And so I'm not sure where it is, but I believe you can filter out by IDs and then send them, depending on the rule, send them where they need to go. Let me see. You can use tags and targets in some way, but I haven't done that here, so I'll let you explore that rule. In any case, so just as an example, I think the phone call that I made, you'll be able to grab all this information about the outbound phone call I just made to Genesys. And the topic is listed here, the customer start topic. As you can see, the conversation ID, the participant ID, and the phone number as well, the DNIS. And as I said earlier, I'm just sending these to an archive that I created just to do a proof of concept. But you have the ability to send these messages either to an SQS or, oh, what did I click on? An SQS, Lambda, or even your own API destination. Here it is. Again, I didn't get a chance to play with that, but you know, it kind of shows that you'll be able to take those messages and even integrate with other applications. I think one of our questions was, can we integrate this with Splunk? And if Splunk can interface with AWS, then absolutely yes. And that's basically it. Did I miss anything, Jim? I think.
Yeah, no, I think that was great. So I think one of the additional benefits of EventBridge, as Prashant was showing, there's some configuration to just set up the connectivity between Genesys and AWS. But once that's done, Genesys and AWS are going to maintain that connection, right? You don't have to write any code to do that. Those two cloud platforms are going to manage that connectivity of the events getting to the event bus. It allows you to not have to worry, like I mentioned on the notification API, you might have to, if you were writing it for yourself, you might have to implement an HA kind of primary backup hot standby scenario. You don't have to do that with EventBridge. You can focus your Lambda. You could write a Lambda as an event handler. You can just focus on the event handler, right? You don't have to worry about all the other infrastructure logic. You just get to worry about the business logic. I get this event and I need to, update some third-party system with it. It's very powerful. So I would encourage you, even if you're not an AWS shop, if you really need to process real-time events, to update third-party systems, to update BI tools, to do whatever, this is really a great mechanism to look at, to use it. All right.
So we do have one question. Let me see. How how conversation ID can be passed to event, such as conversation ID wrap-up automatically, use case third-party API to be triggered post the wrap-up code was selected for an interaction. Let me see, user ID third party.
So with that, I think if you're using EventBridge, using EventBridge, that ID is going to come in the payload. That conversation ID will be in the payload, as will the wrap-up code. So there's really nothing for you to do. For the notification API, you would have to know the conversation ID up front to even subscribe to that event. So you can say, I want to know all calls that enter a queue, which would give you the ID. And then, you can monitor that to get the wrap up for the conversation ID. But they kind of work a little differently. One, you're going to get the ID in the event. The other, you've got to get the ID by some other mechanism. So hope that answers your question. If not, again, post it into the forum and we'll get a more detailed answer for you if we didn't answer that properly. Are you planning to implement any streaming services instead of WebSockets based on gRPC streaming or something else, not EventBridge? So that's an interesting question. So gRPC, maybe your Google Cloud GCP platform, or maybe you're using Azure. We don't have any plans ourselves to implement an event feed to either one of those platforms. I have seen folks use EventBridge to forward the events to Azure Event Grid or whatever the corollary thing is on GCP. We also have some App Foundry partners. I know of at least one that pushes events to Azure, and Azure's pretty cool. And especially if you were to look at this product on the App Foundry, it's from Neuralogix. If you push them to Azure, Azure has all sorts of integration hooks into other Microsoft, like Power BI. You can take event data and push it straight into a spreadsheet in Office. You can do all sorts of really cool things just with very little coding on Azure. But yeah, either you have to get the events there yourselves, or look at one of our third-party App Foundry partners that would get those events there for you. Oh, well, Taurus. So Taurus is from Neuralogix. I think that was he was wanted me to point out that they can get stuff to AWS or to Azure. All right. So Prashant, you want to stop sharing, and I'm going to cover off the last little bit here. We've got a few more minutes.
Definitely.
Okay.
There you go. All yours.
All right. Let me share again. All right. So we've talked about notification API. We've talked about EventBridge. Now we're going to talk about process automation triggers. And that documentation is not under the notifications. So if you go looking at notifications, it's not under that. Go to the platform section, and process automation is there. And the reason it's under platform is because it is part of our platform where you're developing these event triggers. So the overview page is a great page to explain what triggers are. So there are a limited number of triggers at this point. So they're all based around conversations. The idea of triggers was, in many cases, customers and Genesys partners want to know, say, the disposition code. When a call ends, I want to know the disposition code, and I want to update our CRM with an activity record on that with that disposition code. Right? Perfect example. Without writing any code per se, you can do all that in Genesys Cloud. You don't need to have EventBridge. You don't need to use the notification API in Java or JavaScript or C# or anything. You can just use built-in Genesys technologies to monitor all conversations that end and take that wrap-up code and do something with it. So like this topic right here, the wrap-up topic. you could set a trigger based on that and perform some action. So we use JSON path. So you're going to get an event. You're not going to get an event. An event is going to occur, and you want to set up a matching criteria to know that that is an event that you want to process to perform an action on. So you'll use our API to set up a trigger that says, if the event matches some criteria. So you can use JSON path and an operator and a value. You can say if this property equals this, or this property is not equal to that, or we've got a number of operators that are defined: greater than, equal to, less than, contains, kind of, we've got a number of operators that you can perform on that JSON path property, looking for a specific value. So you match the criteria to the event. And if that event matches, we're going to invoke a target. At this time, the only target we can invoke is a architect workflow. In the future, there may be other targets that we invoke, but workflows are very powerful, give you a lot of flexibility inside the workflow to do certain things. So we most likely will stick with that for some time. The events you get are a little bit different. So first of all, let me scroll back to the top. These events really only exist for triggers. They were created specifically for triggers. They're not really available on the notification API or the EventBridge. They were to create, well, I think they are on EventBridge. They were created as a different kind of conversation model. Our typical conversation JSON object, you have to go through and look at certain properties. Like, to determine if an agent put a call on hold, you've got to look at several properties to determine that. Or to know if the customer released the call, or if the agent released the call. You need to look at various properties on the conversation JSON to figure that out. So what we did was we came up with some new topics that basically create trigger points for at the conversation. So right when the customer starts the conversation, when the user joins the conversation, when they end the conversation, when they wrap it up, that kind of thing, you can now know all of that and trigger off of each of those. So like when it goes into the queue, or when it exits the queue, when it hits the agent, you'll know all that. Then you invoke the workflow, and here's an example of kind of what a trigger looks like, what an event trigger looks like, so that you can build that JSON path expression. So enough of that, you guys can read through that as you see fit. Here's an example of a trigger. So we give you an example here in the static documentation. So they want to know all calls that went unanswered. So in this case, it's when the customer ends the call. I want to look and I want to match, is it an outbound call of voice? The media type is voice, not a chat. And did the interaction duration, was it less than 1 second? Okay, it's in milliseconds, so 1,000's 1 second. So if it was just a 1 second call, we're going to assume that was an unanswered call, and we're going to trigger a workflow. You got to give it a workflow ID, and then in that workflow, you can do something with that. So that's just a good example of a trigger. We have a number of APIs. So right now, we do not have a user interface for you to define a trigger. Triggers are created via APIs. So you can either use our API Explorer to create triggers, or you can do that through some code. You can use Postman, you could do whatever. Once the trigger's set up, it's in the system. Until you delete it or inactivate it, it's available in the system. So it's not like you have to have running code that constantly creates the trigger. Once you create it, it's there. So you can call the post operation to create a trigger. We have some in our org that we've already created. So if I do a get, Get available topics. Hold on, it's up here. Get triggers. So let me get those and show those to you. Let me execute this. So on my Prashant's and our org that we use here internally, we created a number of triggers. So here we wanted to know when an agent joined a chat. So we were monitoring the queue ID for a specific queue. We want to know when conversation users start, right? That's when the agent joined the chat, and we want to invoke this workflow. So let's go take a look at that real quick. So let's go look at that workflow. This is the agent joined. It's this FF, it ends in CFFB. So if I go to admin and I go to architect, and I don't want inbound call, I want workflow. So this is, I know that Prince on my team created this, and he did Prince agent join. So if you look at that ID, CFFB, you can see that right here in the address bar. So that's how you know it's this workflow that's getting invoked. I wish it were named. I wish it could use the name, but the names can change. The IDs don't change. So the IDs have more permanence. So we go off of the ID. So it's kind of a hassle to figure out, what workflow is getting invoked, but it's not that hard of a problem to solve. So when an agent joins that conversation, this workflow is invoked. This workflow calls a data action. And we were taking the conversation ID, the time it started, and the agent who joined the chat, and sending that to a third party. We had a third party that wanted to know every time an agent joined a chat, and that's how we did it. So we've got a data action, send agent join. So data actions are in actions. Joined. Set up. So it's got that contract, and we're sending. We're just, Prince was using a local tunnel. It's kind of like ngrok, just to send events, and he was sending this body to his service, just so he could show that he could get notifications when agents joined. You could do anything like robotic process automation. That's really what this was built for. Was maybe you want to automate address changes. You're a bank, and somebody moved, they want to update their account record. You don't want the agent to have to do that. So you might monitor when you get an email, for an address change, or when an agent wraps up a call with a certain wrap-up code for an address change. You might then send that to a third-party ticketing system to, for your back office workers to do the address change. Now, an interesting thing about this trigger specifically is that JSON path can be pretty involved. Here, I wanted to look at the participants array, and I wanted to find where the queue ID matched a certain queue ID. So, you can really dig down pretty far into a complex JSON object and get that data. And then we had one more trigger that Prince built for when agents left. So think of them as event hooks in Genesys. When this event occurs, I want to do something. You don't have to really write any code. All your code is kind of a low code method, basically a workflow. Drag and drop blocks onto your workflow to do something when that event occurs. It's a really nice system. I think it's going to be really powerful. I am going to go into more detail on this next month, on the DevCast next month. So I kind of covered the highlights here. We're going to go through some real use cases next month of how to actually see this in action and update a third-party system when events occur. I'll go through that start to finish, creating the trigger, calling the third-party system, looking at how that's implemented. So we'll really dig into event triggers next month. And I plan to have the product manager for event triggers on and an engineer from the development team, so we can really dig into those and understand some of your questions better. So let's go through the Q&A real quick. For process automation, is there something in place to prevent endless loops? So process automation has been in beta for well over a year. And they were working on issues exactly like that. One of the first triggers I actually built went into an endless loop. And yeah, it's there are some mechanisms, there's some throttling and stuff that goes on. Dan, if you join next month, if you can join next month, it would be better to get that from the development team on how that works. But yes, like I said, the very first thing I did was manage to get myself into an endless loop. Actually, I can show you real quick. I built this RPA intake was my trigger. That was my first one I built. And I wanted to process things that came into a queue. I wanted to send those off to a third-party system to create a ticket in like Zendesk for things to happen. And I ended up, because I didn't update anything on the conversation, I never knew that I actually processed that item, and it would just circularly process. I was just pumping event after event over to this third-party system. So I actually ended up having to monitor if this RPA processed attribute was set to true. And if I look at that on my architect flow for that, so process RPA processing, can't remember which one it was that I did. Yeah, so one of the first things I had to do to stop that endless loop was I had to update the conversation data with RPA process true so that it would not match my criteria anymore and not process that. So let's see, we got to get through these. We have 5 more minutes. What are all the parameters which are accepted under JSON path? There is a list. So the schema, the event schema, all events that you get will be a part of this schema. So you will have to, you can only use things that are in this schema to be able to use on your JSON path. One thing to note, this does not give you the entire conversation JSON. Okay, so event triggers are kind of higher level. You get these top tier kind of properties that you can look at for pattern matching. If then inside of your workflow, you can use the Genesys Cloud APIs, use a Genesys Cloud data action to get the conversation ID and get the conversation JSON and do further filtering in the workflow if need be. But just know that you can't build a JSON path that monitors the entire standard conversation JSON. All right. Like Jim said, ID as a wildcard can be used with all events in a EventBridge. Similarly, ID will work as a wildcard in process automation triggers way as well. Yes. So with process automation triggers, the ID in curly braces that you see in the events, you do not specify. You do not specify the ID. You just specify one of these events in the event that you're looking for, and then use the JSON path to filter. If you were looking only to process events from a certain agent, you could set a JSON path to do that. Or as I said, in the workflow, you could do some filtering as well. So in the workflow, you would get maybe the user ID and could say if it matches a list of agents in this data table, then process, otherwise thrown away. So really powerful. The things that you can do with triggers is going to be really fantastic. So I'm really excited about triggers. I've been waiting a long time for them. Does Resource Center Developer Center has a small description for all the topics that makes it easier to understand what topics does what? The Developer Center, under the notifications section, you can see all the available topics. Some, I will admit, some have better descriptions than others. Some are kind of hard to determine what they do. They're loosely related to the APIs in the platform API. So usually you can figure out what it does, but you know, we have the high level description, and some have a more detailed description as well. If you ever have a question, again, the developer forum, post a question on there. We monitor that. We will get you an answer, hopefully very quickly, usually no later than a day or two. So, but usually within a couple of hours. How can you get the event schema for the other events than the example given in the documentation? So actually all events, if you scroll down, if you go to the available topics and you look at an event, the event schema for everything, for all events are in here. So actually those are, let me go down to the user ones that I was using for user presence, right? I can see the event schema for what user presence looks like in the docs. So I can get an idea of what the JSON is of the event so that I can know what properties to look for. I can kind of code for those up front without having to build enough code and receive one and then look at it through, you know, console logging and figure out, all right, what properties do I need to look at? All right, we are bumping up against our time here. Prashant, anything else you want to chime in on before we let everybody go?
No, I think you covered it pretty well.
All right. All right. Well, everybody, thanks for joining today. As I've said many times, the developer forum, please use that. There's a link on the landing page at the Developer Center to get to the forum. Post a question in there. We're happy to follow up. Again, join us next month. Again, it'll be me. I'm sorry you guys have to listen to me all the time, but it'll be me and the team from the process automation development staff should be on with us, and we'll really dig into triggers and all the use cases. It's been in beta for well over a year. There's a lot of use cases that have been implemented already, and they will cover those off with you and give you lots of ideas for what you can do in your contact center with triggers. So we will see you next month, and take care.